Hey guys, we're back into a LS 6.2. Brings back memories. A lot of you probably don't know that I started putting LSs and JKs 10 years ago. Driving this JK reminds me how well the LS worked in the JK all those years ago. And I must say, right up until the LT was released, I don't think there was anything better. I've driven all sorts of power adders, turbochargers, superchargers, Hemis, you name it. And I still think that the LS was the best, right up until the LT came along. So let's look at a couple of differences between the LS and the LT so you can determine which one works best for you. One advantage the LS has is it's been around a long time. The Gen 4 LS series engines came out in the mid-2000s, so they're about 15 years old now. They've been rationalized. GM has really nailed these engines. They're reliable, they're affordable, and while I want to say they're from a generation of older technology, they're really not. If you look at the Gen 4 LS versus the Gen 3 LS and even the small block and big block series engines, they have variable valve timing, they have higher compression with better combustion chambers. They're all aluminum construction on many of the LS engines. So they're definitely not the old iron block, small block, and big block of the past. However, they're also not an LT. And some of the biggest differences with the LT are obviously direct injection. And direct injection has its pluses and minuses. I feel GM has done a proper job on the LT when it comes to carbon buildup because we really haven't experienced it. We are running the catch cans on the newer LT1 type engines, but we're not on the trucks, and we haven't had any issues with the trucks. Direct injection is going to allow you better combustion efficiency. It's going to allow you to run higher compression ratios, get more power, and get more economy. When you combine that with a continuous variable valve timing, now the LSs do have variable valve timing, but it's discrete, so it's on and off, where the LTs take that to a new level and make it continuous. Having continuous control of the camshaft has a lot of advantages, not only for performance, but for emissions and economy. From what I understand, GM is using the CVVT not only to reduce NOx or the EGR function like they did in the Gen 4 engines, but to keep the valves clean. They're using some patented technology in cam phasing to help keep the carbon buildup down. They've also come up with some pretty sophisticated positive crankcase ventilation or PCV systems to keep the crankcase contamination from getting to the backside of the valve. And I think the combination works. Like I said, we really haven't experienced any issue with it. So there's a big advantage, direct injection. The second that we already mentioned was CVVT. It's just better cylinder pressure control. Having better cylinder pressure control means that we can increase the cylinder pressure when required and reduce it when needed. So let's say you're going up a little hill like I am right now, you give it a little throttle to accelerate. In a traditional engine, there's a good chance it's going to downshift because it knows that getting that engine into its power band is the way to go. But with an LT engine, the odds are it's just going to phase the cam, boost the power up a little bit, and you're not going to downshift the transmission. I'm not going to say that four-cylinder mode or active fuel management is a big advantage because they've been running that for a long time. And really that technology has been proven to improve fuel economy a little bit. Not a lot, especially on the heavier vehicles. We don't see that much of an advantage. Now there is a new LT engine out that has different active fuel management strategy. I think they call it dynamic fuel management, and it will actually allow you to run in multi-cylinder mode. So instead of just a 4 and an 8 cylinder, it will go down to 2 cylinders. You can literally run your vehicle down the road on as little as 2 cylinders, and it will stage up 3, 4, 5, 6 cylinders, whatever is the most efficient. And I think that might take AFM over the edge to where it might be worth running even on the heavier vehicles, but we'll see. And remember, while GM is increasing the performance of these engines, what a lot of this about is keeping them compliant and increasing the fuel economy or the CAFE average for the manufacturer. In the old days, nothing was free. If you got more power, you usually lost something. Drivability, fuel economy, reliability. What they're doing now is trying to get improvements right across the board, and that's tough. So they're coming up with these new technologies like dynamic fuel management to achieve that goal. Running larger engines means that we have larger pumping losses. Pumping losses are when the engine's at part throttle. The throttle blade is not wide open throttle because that's where the engine's most efficient. So when the engine is throttled, you end up building a vacuum up as the pistons move. You have to fight that. By turning those cylinders off, you essentially turn them into an air spring so that you regain most of that power back. And that's what dynamic and active fuel management is trying to do. Third, and what I believe to be one of the biggest advantages, is the 8-speed and the soon-to-be 10-speed transmission. Most of you know I wasn't a big fan of the 8-speed at first. We installed them. We had some challenges to get them to shift right. But I can say now that when we roll a 8-speed build out of the shop, it's pretty much usually ready to go. Between GM's improvements, the improvements in aftermarket tuning software, and our experience, we've got these 8 speeds shifting almost like 1 speeds. We're like butter smooth. No more clunking when you come to a stop. No more sum-timers. This wasn't particular to the GM 8 speeds. The ZFs and others had the same issue. My wife has a 9-speed Chrysler Pacifica, and it still has the issues, and it's a 17. But I can say that the 8L90, in my opinion, is pretty much nailed right now. Not sure about the 10-speed yet. We're going to start dabbling in those, but I'd give that a year or two before I think they have those fully dialed in. It is a Hydromatic transmission. It's not built overseas. It's using similar technology to the current transmissions that GM builds, so it's not groundbreaking technology, and I think it's going to work in well. In fact, it's using the same transmission controller as the 8L90. Now, when we talk about the 8-speed transmission, if you take a 4-speed small block or 4-speed Gen 3 motor, and then you drive a 6-speed Gen 4 engine, you immediately notice the difference. The bottom end, there's a tremendous improvement in the launch off the line. It's not soggy anymore like it was with the 4L60 and the 4L80. The 6L80 is really quick off the line. Remember, it has a 4-to-1 first gear. Then on the top, the 6L80 has a 0.66 overdrive versus the old 4-speed 0.8, approximately 0.8. So we had a better high-end cruising. So the gear diversity is really not that much different. The 8L90 has a 4.6 low and a 0.6 overdrive. So yes, it has a little bit lower of a low and a little bit higher of a high. What it does is it gives us intermediate gears, gears in between that allow the engine to stay in the sweet spot. And on the flip side, what I'm noticing with the newer 8L90s, the newer tunes, is the throttle response. It's instant. When you give it throttle, it instantly goes because you're in a gear that allows that engine to perform to its best. Now, this technology has been known for a long time, and it was especially applied to the smaller engines and the diesels. Diesels have a narrow power band, and smaller engines have to rev up to get into their power band. So by going to a high gear transmission, you could keep those engines in their preferred range more of the time. With the V8 having the widespread torque band, it just wasn't as critical. And when the 6L80 came along, it was such a huge improvement over the 4-speed that when the 8L90 came along, while it was an improvement, it just wasn't as big of a step. But now that GM has had some time to really get these transmissions dialed in, I am noticing a larger difference. And since the shifting strategy has finally been rationalized, and what I mean by that is it's smooth. You're not getting the herky-jerky, clunking. Since the majority of those issues are a thing of the past, I think the 8L90 has finally got to the level and surpassed the earlier transmissions. The 6L80 is a clutch-to-clutch transmission, where the 8L90 went back to a traditional valve body. So I think you have to look at the engine performance market for Wranglers, and that includes the JL and the JT, as a stair step. If you got a 3.8 or a 3.6 and you're happy with it, that's great. If you're not, you have the choice of a lot of low-cost engine performance adders. Things like throttle body spacers and tuners. Now, my personal opinion is you're probably not going to be happy with most of those. A lot of my customers go that route. I actually did when I first had my JK. I used tuners and things. It just wasn't enough of an improvement or no improvement. So in my opinion, your value for dollar is really not that great. If you go to air intakes and exhaust systems, there's always a trade-off. It's loud. So before you add a low-cost power adder, go and drive it, test it, make sure it works right. Then you can step up to a supercharger or a turbocharger, and of course they're going to add power. You can add a tremendous amount of power using either a supercharger or a turbocharger. Running a blower has compromise, just like everything else. My biggest complaint, and I would say most of my customers' biggest complaint, is the drivability. When you add a blower or a turbocharger without a proper 2 or 3 bar operating system, you might get hesitation, weird transmission shifting. You may not be happy with the drivability of the vehicle. The other side of it is engine longevity and reliability. Also, I think when you compare apples to apples, revving a small engine up like a V6 versus having a low-stressed, low RPM engine like a V8, you're just not going to get the same driving experience. So if we move into the V8s, there's a lot of options, and the most popular is obviously the Hemi. Is it the best? Well, that's a good question. I think that the Hemi has been considered the best option because it integrates so well with the Chrysler operating system. However, the Hemi is a larger engine, and let's face it, I'm a Chrysler guy. I've owned Hemis. I've got a 1968 Charger 500. I've got a 340 six-pack Challenger. I love Mopar stuff. GM doesn't build the best cars, but when it comes to powertrains, I've always been a GM guy. They put out good horsepower, they're reliable, they're affordable, and I just like the simplicity of the overhead valve engine. I personally don't like the Chrysler transmissions. I think the WA580 was a big improvement over the old 545 RFE and a huge improvement over the 42 RLE that the JK ran. However, I don't think it's up to the standard of the 6L80 and definitely not the 8L90. Now, Chrysler does have some new 8-speeds out, and they are a big improvement. So a Hemi with an 8-speed I think is a great combination. Now, if we take the next step up and we look at the LTs with the 8-speed, I do feel that's top of the line. We do have the direct injection, we do have the simplicity of the overhead valve engine, we do have continuous variable valve timing, and they're just a phenomenal powertrain to drive. There's nothing else like it. I'm driving this LS right now and I enjoy it. It's great, I love it, but I can definitely tell the difference driving this than when I drive an LT with an 8-speed up this mountain. Would I be happy with an LS? Yeah, of course, especially from coming from a V6. It's a dramatic improvement from a V6. And the difference between the LS and the LT is not as great as from the V6 to the LS. In my opinion, that's the hierarchy of engine performance options right now, with the LT being the king of the pile. I can say that I actually miss driving the LTs now. I know that it's something we created that is probably the best driving experience in a JK that I've ever had. And you gotta be realistic. The LSs are the last generation. GM has phased them out. They will be supported for years to come, but the LT is going to be in current production and will be supported many, many years from now, as well as more versions and models will be released. Plus, with the aftermarket jumping in with both feet, you're going to be able to do anything you want with an LT. I predict in the not too distant future, you're going to be able to have an LT with 600-700 horsepower like an LT4 or LT5, 10-speed transmission, putting out economy figures that we never saw in the past and still putting out tremendous horsepower. It's just something we couldn't dream of in the past. We do have a bunch of LT builds coming up. A little bit about this JK. It's an early JK. I think it's about a 2009. Has an L94 all aluminum 6.2 LS with a 6L80, and it's bringing back memories. When I first put a 6.2 LS in the 2009 Rubicon all those years ago, and I drove it for the first time, I was just amazed at how much better the engine performance was. See you soon.